and thank you. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate that. Hopefully you find this enjoyable. I think it'll be an interesting afternoon. We've got many things going on today. The Engineering Machine Design Championship is upstairs. So like I emailed out, if you be so inclined to enjoy yourself and stay longer, that'll be happening. We also started a new one called the Reverse Engineering Challenge, which we're rifling kids through on a half an hour kind of thing. That new concept is really driven around telling a young person this challenge this time is they're given an LED lamp and they're said, you know what, you've been out canoeing, your canoe tips over, and now the only thing that you're able to save is this lamp and yourself onto the shore, but you need a water filtration system. What kind of technology, by taking this apart, because they can take it apart, what kind of technology can you derive off of this, utilizing resources that might be around you and this component or this LED lamp that you have here as well. So, and then what they'll do is come up with the concept. They have 20 minutes or something like that, and then they will present to judges. And then the judges are really evaluating them on, again, professionalism. And if the concept is a good concept, did they really think about it? Did they use an engineering thought process to it? And everything like that. So that's a whole new competition that we're trying as well. Always trying to do new things. And this is a new thing here as well. So I know a couple of years ago, I had something on the St. Cloud State campus and had some pedagogy opportunities there, but we thought we'd think outside the box. I was lucky enough to have Eric and Rob support Melissa and myself on just coming up with ideas. What would be interesting and what would be something good to go ahead and bring here. So this is what it all come to. So I hope you enjoy your day. More things here right around the corner. Again, we have coffee and refreshments. There's restrooms over there down the hallway as well. We might hear a little rock band action because the weight room is right down around the corner there as well. That's where that's coming from. But again, it's going to be a very active campus today. So if you just want to walk around and observe at some point and stretch your legs, please do. Enjoy yourself. Any issues with parking, let me know. I paid for that whole lot, so I own that lot. And so if I have an issue with parking, I will get that addressed. So I apologize if there's any issues with that ahead of time. Other than that, is there any questions I can help and support you on? How our flow of our day is going to be pretty simple. Rob's got you for the after the presentation here from Michael, and we'll just kind of flow from there. I think it'll be interesting. It's going to be different, which I love different and trying to think outside the box. So without further ado, I'm gonna let this young man, Michael, here to go ahead and lead out. He's going to talk about his background as opposed to me doing the introduction. I think I'll let the chief drive the bus. So thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Good morning and welcome. For those that showed up, and do me a favor, for those that you know that didn't and thought they were getting a nice long 3-day weekend in the sun, rub it in and be sure to tell them what they missed. I'm Michael Ruby. I'm the president of a company called Microban, and some of you may have actually heard of Microban or seen it in the retail aisle with a Microban 24 residual cleaner. I'm going to actually use that today as one of many cases we'll go through in terms of the theory of co-opetition and how that can be applied in the context of the business world and the educational world. We are based in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we are active in antimicrobials, odor control technologies for things that you wear, apparel, shoes, sheets, comforters, etc., and disinfectant and cleaning technologies, which we just entered that sector in February of 2020. So someone called that great timing. Quite frankly, it was just outstanding luck because we had technologies that were sitting in an EPA approval queue for up to 6 years before that time. But very advantaged to have stepped into that space in early 2020. Today, I'd like to just share with you kind of the map of the day, and I'll beg forgiveness from Rob just in the beginning. I may run a touch over, but I think you've got a good chunk of workshop time. I'll introduce myself, kind of who's this guy and why is he here? And then I love a great academic mind. I'm an engineer by training, And I think, some basis in theory always helps to set the context for then diving into some casework and some practical, like what's this really look like in life? So we'll go through some cases in a whole variety of industry, different sectors and geographies. And then we're going to hone in and narrow down on where is co-opetition practically and successfully used in education. And hopefully this leaves you with some real world, multi-decade examples of some things that you might work on your workshops in, and how you can actually apply that across in-state engineering system. So if there's any questions as we go, look, we can more than happy to make this a conversation. But as you may know from sort of hearing me, seeing me, listening to me, I'm not from around here. Indeed, I was born in the gem city of Illinois. Anybody know what the gem city of Illinois is? Quincy. There's not much left. This bridge still remains, and that's about the prettiest thing in Quincy. But I was born in Quincy, Illinois. And, I would have been happy to live a simple life. I've lived in a lot of small towns in the USA and overseas. Growing up, my father was a turnaround guy in manufacturing. And so we would go from place to place and town to town, and usually a small 1 mill town somewhere in the Rust Belt. And we would have 18 months where he was either turning a business around and we'd leave town in a ticker tape parade, or the mill was closing and that town was probably shutting down, and we'd sneak out of town under the cover of night and go on to the next challenge. And so what this has given me is the opportunity to live in 18 homes in 9 states in 2 countries. And that breadth, that sort of ability to recreate yourself in so many different places, so many different microcultures, gives me an absolute priceless appreciation for differences in thinking and differences in practice in the global community and culture. It's given me a very diverse viewpoint of life, and an ability to sort of recreate or chameleonize myself when it comes to business. And this will be important as we continue to talk later on. From a professional standpoint, I started my career in Nalco Company, that's now part of Ecolab, St. Paul based, in process chemicals, treating water treatment, chemical plants, wastewater plants, metals, manufacturing facilities, leather tanneries, paper mills, and the like. And it gave me an intro to consultative selling. It gave me an introduction to being able to work from 4 a.m. in a sump pit replacing a pump, to pulling a felt across a new machine, to that afternoon making a presentation to a division head that oversees over $1 billion worth of manufacturing production, and being in part responsible for sometimes assets that manufacture north of $150,000 per hour of net profit. When you've got a tissue making machine that's running at almost a mile a minute, the profit can stack up quick or the loss of profit can stack up quick unless you know what you're doing with your chemistry and how that impacts that process in that machine. I moved on to a small startup, which was a turnaround. Maybe that was subconsciously part of my chance to say, hey, Dad, I could do it too. To a small company called Glasscraft. It was a money-losing entity, and I was given 18 months to turn it around. And if so, they would make it worth my while. It was a hedge fund-owned organization. Really had to dig deep into distribution management, new product design, international sales. I spent probably 75% of my time at Glasscraft on a plane going overseas. 3/4 of our sales were Asia-based. And this was in specialty meter mix dispense equipment. And then we ended up turning that business around in 12 months and selling it to Graco, Minneapolis-based. So I've spent my share of time coming back and forth in and out of Minnesota over the course of time. I then had a chance to move into a company called Celanese, which is a specialty materials organization, and joined the organization more or less as an intrapreneur, given the hands of a startup organization within a big multinational. And that requires a certain different mindset versus sort of big chemco. I had an opportunity to work there within a great team, hyper-matrixed environment, learning to lead through influence, new process development, P&L ownership on a global basis, and evolving in part a culture that has since reverted, sadly, but being able to kind of elbow out that very interesting and creative space. There was also a couple of examples there where we leveraged the theory of and put in practice co-opetition. I there also had the great opportunity to meet and work with, at the time, a colleague who now sits in the room and is your colleague. And we worked a lot in Winona State, in the Winona area. That was the center of excellence for manufacturing. So sort of 3 times in a row, I'm spending a lot of time in Minnesota, but I've never lived here, as you saw from that earlier map. I joined Microban in 2018, and I joined leading the global built-in business unit, which enables product manufacturers to incorporate antimicrobials into their product at the point of manufacture, any substrate, any surface. So we can make this laminate antimicrobial for the life of its product. We can make the clothes you wear anti-odor. When you wear a golf shirt, it starts to pick up human body odor from isovaleric acid that comes from human sweat the first time you put it on. And after about 10 wearings, if that product isn't treated, it starts to pick up what we call permastink, right? And so I know when I weed out my wardrobe every other year, it's not, the collars aren't curling up anymore. These are all polymeric shirts, right? It's from stink that these things go away. And so we work on technologies that are sometimes pesticidal, biocidal in nature, sometimes are non-pesticidal actives, and of course in our cleaning and disinfectant areas. It's a really fun company because we are asset light and technology agnostic. So we're able to draw from technologies from all sorts of manufacturers who have to bear the burden of capital investment and everything else. We take those, we uniquely combine them into formulations that we then register with the EPA to deliver unique performance, so that we sort of combine what this guy can do and this guy can do in a unique way that usurps either one of those, and take those to market with our branded partners around the world who pay us kindly for our royalty as well as our technology. And so in textiles, in built-in products, and in cleaning disinfection, it's a very interesting organization to have the pleasure and the honor to lead, because we're an ESOP, we're an employee-owned organization. So unlike all these other firms, it's not a couple of princes at the top that bear the fruit of everyone else. Everybody in our organization carries shares and carries responsibility for growing our ESOP trust. And so it's quite interesting because you get strategic alignment and culture very, very quickly. A little bit about kind of what makes me tick. Starting in the upper right, that's my family. I've got the face for radio, but thank goodness they all take broadly from my beautiful wife, Laura. She and I love food and wine. We're members of the Chaîne de Restaurateurs. It's an international food and fine dining society and wine collecting society. Has a couple hundred chapters all over the world. We run the organization in Charlotte. We love to travel. We actually just returned from a multi-station trip through Europe, ending in the Amalfi Coast, Positano. Wow, what a soul-moving Zen place that is. I'm a big believer in the 3 E's, experience, education, and exposure. And I've been very lucky in life that certain things lined up at some point in time to drive me to have the honor of attending UCLA for my undergrad. I'm a mechanical engineer by training. Never wanted to be a desk engineer, wanted to go into technical sales and management and be able to keep technicians honest and keep manufacturers honest and have that bridge. And then I was blessed enough to be able to go to work and at school at Northwestern to get my MBA. And in business, you can see that variety is the spice of life. And I like to reinvent myself, and I like to go into sectors that I have no idea what I'm doing and take the blinders off and be objective and pull together teams and lead them to success. So with that context, we move into a discussion of what I'll start with first. The first element of co-opetition is competition. And the competitive mindset is one, of course, which you can think about very easily in terms of war. Most research shows, however, that in the business world, most businesses thrive when their competition thrives, when a sector thrives, when there is a sort of a rising tide scenario. The bias that's inherent to the competitive mindset is one that you really have to soul search as a human and as an organization to make co-opetition work, right? You have to get out of this zero-sum game thinking. And so you have to get out of that and think in terms of not just constraints and trade-offs and substitution, but also the complementary nature that competitive entities can hold. And, as I look across the room, I don't know how many dozen different universities within sort of the same network and system I see represented here. On certain veins, you're competing for the same resources. You're competing for the same funding. But there's a certain element, and I hope that you get a chance to unpack that today, where potentially by acting as one, that you can go farther together. When you think about complementors, this is a thing that we'll unpack in just a bit. That's what you really kind of have to put into your dialogue versus competitors alone to open up the thought on co-opetition. First I'd like to share a story with you. When I was studying business economics and general management at Kellogg, I was introduced to a concept of sort of a homo economics, a person or an embodiment of a thought or person that sort of purely rational, effective, machine-like, logical, non-emotional, et cetera, and didn't have any feelings or emotions, worked in a purely factual manner for profit using rational thinking, right? And when I heard of this, I just had to laugh, because even myself as a logic-driven engineer, I've got thoughts, feelings, I have passions, I cry, I feel. And so this concept really didn't present itself well to me. I did, in one of those stints, and I won't tell you which one, have an opportunity to work for a gentleman that came about as closest to the embodiment of that homo economicus as possible. This is an individual that in the workplace was pure fact, no passion, pure judgment, the binary world, right? Yet it was interesting, and I'll make a mention, he was a Dutch gentleman, but I'll say no more about that, but that's probably not so surprising. I'll make a comment that outside of work, this was a gentleman who was ebullient. He was a spendthrift. He was the life of the party. But in the work environment, it was like Jekyll and Hyde, unbelievable. And so I think that's one of the concepts here where I think about the context, right? And the context and the culture from within you work has a very big impact on the ability to think more broadly outside of a zero-sum game. And so be sure to keep that concept as you work through things today. I'd like to share another story with you to get the gears moving. My dad, as I said, was in manufacturing, and we sort of move all around the country, either turning plants around and saving the day, or creating one more American town that's on its way to being a one-stop light, no population place. When it came time for me to consider where to go to university, I was just lucky enough to have state residency in California, far, far in the north. And he was just being relocated to Philadelphia. So I was lucky enough to say, I'm going to stay here. You guys cross the country. I'll go to UCLA. That in and of itself was a transformative experience. Go Bruins. In an awesome university. It's ranked again #1 in public universities nationwide this year. But it was a bit of a culture shock, right? Having lived in places like Hutchinson, Kansas, and Tama, Iowa, and these sort of towns that are half or a third of the population of Mankato. And then you step onto a campus where there's 45,000 undergrads, and then there's a graduate population. It was absolutely jarring. And I think was the transformative moment for me in terms of you can let that sink you, or you can always grab those opportunities to reinvent yourself. And I just think of that in the context of you have to shed, right, how things have always been done here, and think with a clean sheet in terms of what the future and forward possibilities might be. I remember the most jarring experience, and it's something that you might see here on the upper left-hand side. That's what I saw when I walked into my freshman chemistry course at UCLA. There was 430 individuals there. I came 15 minutes early, sort of Lombardi time, and no seats left. I've got to sit on the steps and that sort of thing. So everybody is familiar with the Weeder course, right? But you think about that, day one, the professor says, 100 of you will pass this course. So, 320 are out. And so that was sort of the expectation management going in, rule with fear. And so, the university was using this, of course, as a pressure test, using competition as a means to motivate students. And there's a certain, usefulness to that, but didn't pay attention at all to ensure that, everybody has a chance to reach the finish line. But instead, separate the wheat from the chaff and ensure only the best will reach the finish line. And so there's an add-on effect there. It teaches students fear. It sort of reinforces that zero-sum game. There's the us and there's the them, and you just sort of have to step on, get over, and survive. It teaches students that the zero-sum game is hard at work in the education sector. And the problem that happens is when we say that sort of competition is the only way to run a business or the only way to run a university system, it doesn't necessarily need to govern the marketplace, right? So the story of winners and losers is really kind of an ancient story, whether that's in the educational world, whether that's in the war world, whether that's in relationships, interpersonal relationships, or the sports world reinforces it. We have all these different programming inputs that are constantly telling us you either win or lose, and there's no way to change that from a black and white zero-sum game. So this is passed on in businesses. It's even passed on in societies, right? Unfortunately, as we are reading in the news every day, between Russia and Ukraine, or between China and the US, or you name it. So take into context that there is this huge tidal wave of programming, right, that you've been subject to throughout your entire lives, and all your students have been subjected to and throughout their entire lives. And there's a certain action that has to be taken to potentially help to undo part of that programming. Some more commentary on the competitive mindset. So, it's really something that's hardwired. We sit as humans on top of the food chain. We strive for personal and professional success. It's us versus them. It's win or lose. And within the context of pretty much every professional organization, any for-profit organization, and probably within not only this network, but each and every one of your educational organizations, that tends to be the ruling factor. I was recently reading an article that talked about personality profiles. I was doing some work with my team on different street corners and how different viewpoints can show you how things look differently from different perspectives, and how together we could get to better answers if we had good listening around those different viewpoints. And this article actually went so far to say that a typical corporate profile, if seen through the context of a person, is that of a psychopath. So I think co-opetition can be a cure, right? It's not just acting like somebody who has difficulty making friends, who lies and cheats to make money, who has a blatant disregard for others. That's how you would maybe characterize a lot of for-profit organizations. So I don't know within the educational context if it's that severe, and maybe the hurdle is lower to get over that, but you have to overcome those biases. These two quotes that are on screen are very, very different viewpoints when I talk about those different street corners. So competition versus co-opetition, right? The Vidal quote on the left is clearly a zero-sum game-based viewpoint, right? Somebody's got to lose, somebody has to win, and it really can't even be close, right? Run up the score. The Lincoln quote on the right is a bit more collaborative. It represents sort of keeping your enemy closer, which is an interesting concept in co-opetition, and I'll give some cases later on. For some, this is really indeed the rationale for creating a co-opetition strategy. For a market leader, it would be a driver for creating a co-opetition strategy. Keep your fast-moving, hard-charging second and third tier competitors a little bit closer, so that they don't have that element of surprise. I don't know if anyone in the room has read Dan Pink's books, but he has a book out now called The Drive. And in one of his books called The Drive, one of the insights there is that people aren't just motivated by winning or by money, but more so on autonomy and working on things that are of interest, something larger than themselves, and creating something that is more than any given individual can do. And this really is the basis of co-opetition. And many of the competitive vectors you can unlock by engaging such a strategy is being able to leverage something that more than any individual organization can do, and really creating this symbiotic 1 + 1 = 3 or more. So I think that's another context to think about and create better work scope, better work outcomes for your organizations. So let's get on with it and discuss co-opetition. There may be a light at the end of the tunnel, right? That allows us to look at the world, to overcome some of this societal programming that's come through decades of programming, all the different fronts, et cetera. Co-opetition can be part of the answer. And indeed, it is not competition and collaboration separately, but coexisting as one. It's not A versus B, it's A and B working together to boost an outcome. So the term was coined by Ray Nordella, Norda, the founder and CEO of Novell, in the 80s, and that's Ray, to describe cooperation in creating value, competition in dividing it up, right? And so some examples that come to mind that can kind of, begin to get our thinking together on co-opetition that you see and hear about every day. Think of crowdfunding. Think of restaurants that as raw food nears its end of life, and they're not going to sell it and they would normally throw it away, they'll cook it and donate it, right, to a local soup kitchen or co-op or something else. Housing communes, these little book sharing libraries that are all over in different neighborhoods, trading platforms that exist for goods and services, bartering systems, many of which blew up, during the pandemic shutdowns. Co-working spaces, incubators that might be on your campuses, and ride-sharing platforms in certain ways as well. So there's lots of different platforms that can leverage co-opetition that you interact with every day. And my aim here is to sort of unlock some viewpoints that you can kind of say, this is omnipresent, right? And we're not necessarily cutting new ground here. We've got lots of examples that we can inform our viewpoints on. It's kind of like if I smile and you smile back, right? I don't lose a smile, you gain a smile, and we both win. So that's the viewpoint that we can look at it from. Now to a model, the value net model of co-opetition is much like Porter's 5 forces, but it doesn't look at it from the viewpoint of just competitors, but also adds complementers, right? And so everybody knows what a competitor is, but a complementer is a business would be, or an organization would be your complementer if customers view your product as more valuable when combined with that organization. If there's a choice between A and B, of course, that's a competitive situation. So, and these can oftentimes simultaneously exist. Let's talk about a few examples. American Airlines and Delta Airlines. So Charlotte's an American hub, and I had to fly here on American, and I know exactly how limiting that can be in trying to get in and out of a Delta hub. American and Delta compete for gate space, right? And they have their own networks to run, but they are in a co-opetition model in that they jointly offset Boeing's R&D costs. So think about maybe some other networks, if any come to mind. Radios and radio stations. That's an interesting one to think through in terms of the advert model, kind of where the money is made, but where it's applied, and the bandwidth purchasings and auctions and how that works, right? Computer hardware and software, they abound. And they oftentimes flame out their relationships of convenience, but they progress a platform and they progress a business, and they create a unique point of differentiation for certain platforms. Computer hardware, software, cars and auto loans, smart TVs and streaming services. So there's lots of these examples. Here's one that is alive and well today, although in the last week has taken a bit of a hit in terms of its net impact in the content streaming world, right? Amazon and Amazon Prime, right, and Netflix are in direct competition for subscribers, services, for share of mind, for viewership, for awards. But Netflix as a streaming platform is one of the top 3 customers for Amazon Web Services cloud infrastructure business. So that in and of itself is the definition of co-opetition. And it may be one division and another division having very different viewpoints, but these things can coexist. It doesn't mean you have to go all in on either competition. And by going into a cooperative model, doesn't mean you have to give up competing. Another example that was recently launched is in the world of software. Hewlett-Packard exited the cloud infrastructure business in 2016. They couldn't compete against AWS and Microsoft. Outposts was out there. The Azure Stack offerings from Microsoft were out there. HP just said, we can't win at this. Let's pull it back. They just launched, relaunched with a core offering that actually is a triangular offering. And so they host both the Outposts and the Azure Stack offering on their own cloud infrastructure system now. And so this may not be directly reflective of the Lincoln quote we covered a few slides ago, but more reflective of if you can't beat them, join them. But indeed, it's a cooperative viewpoint that HP said, we don't have to just say black, white, we lost, but instead, let's create a gray area where we can still participate and create value and have further options, into the business. So coopetition doesn't mean that you give up, and it doesn't mean that you have to make a choice against competition. It just means that you're going to forward your core competency in a complementary manner with another organization or multiple organizations. So the main principle of coopetition is not just fighting for a bigger slice of the pie. And I hope that made you all hungry. It's a good looking cherry pie. It is working in partnership to make that pie bigger and then fighting for a bigger slice, right? And so it's a growth oriented strategy. So when we talk about it, it really is, in essence, it's collaboration, right? It's collaboration in a competitive context. It's collaboration with an organization that you would otherwise view as an organization that you're across the table from, or an entity that you're across the table from. So there's four main types of collaboration. Welcome back. There's passive collaboration. A good example is my current business. We own registrations with the EPA that are unique. They are assets as strong or stronger than IP. They take a lot of time and a lot of money to get. But they're built on the chassis of manufacturing assets and chemical profiles and tox profiles and registrations that other companies hold. And so it's an asset light model that allows me to kind of pick off of those very investment intensive manufacturing businesses and instead be a brand first organization that solves problems in a unique way. So it's sort of passive, right? My suppliers in some market sectors are direct competitors of mine. And in some market sectors, they don't have the technology to address. I've got the unique performance, functionality, and registration, and they view me as an extension of their business. And we're, in many cases, taking technology that you can get from a commodity supplier and applying that at 8 to 10x a markup, but providing a unique solution and one that has brand association. And it's a brand association with a brand that to the American consumer, and largely, 6 of 10 with the growing brand reach with Microman 24, is an embodiment of trust. That you have trust that those products that are treated with Microman technology have protection that lives on. And that when you consume those in your home, in your workspace, and you apply those, that the predominant decision maker, the she in those spaces is going to buy branded products, right? So that's passive collaboration, but we leverage that each and every day in the business that I run. There's active collaboration. This is really the most predominant form and where most of our case study work and probably workshop work today will cover. There's active competition. So of course, when you choose who you're gonna partner with, you automatically choose who you're gonna then compete with, and it's sort of a stratification there. And then there's passive competition. Think of this as substitutes that you have to remain aware of. The example is, Home Depot competes against house painting companies, right? There's the DIY versus the service provider that'll do it for you. That's passive competition. Just like from another theoretical structure standpoint, just like there are horizontal and vertical orientations to competition models, there are also horizontal and vertical aspects to the co-opetition model. Vertical being, different elements of the same value chain, and horizontal being within the same category of the value chain. So some examples here. If you look at the top diagram here, this would represent vertical co-opetition. So if think about company A. Think about company A being a fork manufacturer and company B being a spoon manufacturer. Both these companies probably purchase metals in bulk, but together, if they were to get into a co-opetition model in the most simple collaborative fashion to jointly purchase, that joint bulk would very likely have more leverage to lower cost and increase security of supply. So combining purchasing power is one potential benefit of co-opetition, and it's used a lot in industry and in academia. But then the next level of such a collaboration is you as a fork manufacturer and your competitor and collaborative purchasing partner as a spoon competitor decide to offer fork, spoon, cutlery sets to consumer markets. And so you create, your core competency complementing their core competency, taking advantage of joint work on the buy side and taking advantage of joint work on the sell side to better both firms, right? So it's a very simple construct. The bottom diagram shows horizontal co-opetition. And think about this as a cross endorsement opportunity. So you've just gone and created, a successful consumer market with your cooperative partner. And then if you then move to a different part of that value chain and decide you're going to launch cutlery kits into restaurant sectors and caterers and other areas, right? So then you're moving across that value chain. So that's where it becomes sort of in a horizontal basis. And so horizontal and vertical co-opetition can coexist very, very nicely. So before we dive into real world examples and kind of put some meat on the bone here, I wanted to start with sort of a summary of this framework and not only some benefits, but some watchouts. Because co-opetition can be used as a weaponizing form of beating your competition as well, right? So you have to be aware of that. So there's some benefits. Let's start with the positives, right? You can share strengths. You can combine your unique advantages, as we just talked about with like the fork spoon model, and complementary strengths so that each can benefit while keeping their own core competencies and remaining in competition with one another in different market sectors. You can distribute the workload. So, competitors or cooperators can grow their business network, manage workforces to take on projects that they otherwise would not be able to take on. This might be a very real benefit that you could consider within the network of Min-State engineering. Team up against larger competitors, right? So smaller startups banding together have a chance to disrupt an installed industry leader and player if they work together. Each and every one alone, not likely. Improve market performance. So competitors can work together to penetrate new markets, tap into new markets through collaboration. We talked about the cutlery sets as an example of that. For industries that function via RFQ, there's that benefit of joining forces to have greater purchasing power or group purchasing power across multiple entities. You can foster technological innovation. You can actually work with a competitor to forward a technology platform. So Dr. Kerr Anderson here in the purple in front from Winona State, when he and I worked together on a team, we were working in the field of thermoplastic composites, which at the time was a nascent field and now is just booming and thriving. We would work with folks that we would view as competitors, but lagging us by a number of years to justify and get capital paid for in our organization that we couldn't otherwise get access to. And that was done via paid statements of work so that we would take our pilot assets or our production assets and monetize those for the development of a grade for our competitor, therefore tying them to our unique performance capital and our IP and our know-how on our machines, creating in essence a customer. They never get a peek behind the curtain, but they get access to materials that they can go seed their customers with and automatically tie back to us. So it creates a competitive dynamic in that they've got their customers and we've got our customers, and those end customers might be competing, but they're competing with the same material. So we've got more than one horse in the same race. We're automatically going to win. And we couldn't win with our organization by going and get capital because there's these large profit spewing organizations that, for every dollar that you invest in them, you're going to get back $1.50. And we were still a technology startup. So we leveraged our competition to gain access to capital that we needed to grow that entrepreneurial startup. That's one of many examples where technology innovation can be fostered, and establishing industry standards. So competitors in the same industry can sort of drive standards. There's a lot of work we do with ISO and JIS and ASTM, where we develop a new standard, say for addressing odor control from ammonia bases or isovaleric acid bases, and then have that adopted and driven across the industry as a better standard. And we help influence those sorts of things in the microbiological world. Drawbacks. So power imbalances are a big time watch out. It's sort of like, there's, I don't know what the implied pecking order is, right, within the human network, right? But let's say in the world I live in, we're a $100 million business, and I compete against companies that are 600 million to $1.5 billion. And so when we work in cooperative models, when we draw from their assets and then go get sub-registrations or unique registrations, we do so surreptitiously, and we sort of co-opt that information quietly. But in the marketplace, we swing therefore way above our weight class. And so you just have to be mindful of the power imbalances that exist within a network and respectful of that. And some of the smaller players might benefit a little bit more than some of the bigger players. Some of the bigger players, though, may feel like they're benefiting by keeping those smaller, maybe more hungry followers closer. And so it's important to kind of keep that power imbalance in mind. Another, sort of power imbalance to realize is, like, look at Amazon Marketplace. So there's a huge number of sort of gig economy businesses, people going to outlet stores and buying a bunch of, last season of stuff and then reselling it on Amazon, for a profit, running that out of their basement. But Amazon in their network now actually has a chance to see what's selling. And then they draw it back in and they create their own Amazon platform, and they end up stamping that out. There's been a ton of lawsuits around this, right? But that's a co-opetition model. It gives them intel, it uses their platform. It never creates an opportunity where someone's going to stamp them out. It just gives them free market intel and using their platform, and ultimately tells them kind of what's selling, what's not. And then they can go develop their Amazon Basics version and make a profit at it and go from there. Lack of trust, probably omnipresent, right? And one to just actively manage. And that's why in cooperative models, especially in business, a lot of times you set aside a group that's going to work. These aren't organization-wide efforts. These are potentially project-focused initiatives to make sure that you have a population that can be contained within that and manage that lack of trust. Risk of imitation or compromise, of course, very real. Just like we're doing, we get in technology from somebody that would compete against us in the marketplace, and then we'll re-engineer that in the lab, a lot like this LED back engineering, thing that's on site today. We'll re-engineer that in the lab, change some end groups, change some functional groups, register a new active, and go out and take share from that incumbent technology. That works very nicely for us. Workload distribution. This is, again, back to sort of that imbalance, but you sort of have to be careful about not signing up for more than you can carry in the partnership. And then in technology leakage is sort of when a partner will use an alliance to acquire intel and ultimately crush a competitor. A great example is Schwinn and Giant Bikes. So the story there is Schwinn, family-owned company, multi-generational. Unfortunately, third generation CEO comes into the job 30 years of age with no real experience. And third gen CEOs already have sort of a couple strikes against them. You know the history on that. He alienated key executives who left to then run foreign companies, and one of those was Giant. Giant Bicycles, in essence, a startup leveraging Southeast Asian manufacturing. Schwinn had manufacturing in Greenville, South Carolina, and their cost bases were massively different. And ultimately, so they were driving heavily towards bankruptcy. And as soon as they declared, Giant came in and preferred a partnership to save them from bankruptcy, got in and understood, sort of some of the unique design and IP things that were sort of coming to the end of life, offered up their manufacturing facilities in Southeast Asia, shared in that cost benefit just enough to keep Schwinn alive for another 2 or 3 years. As they continued to face legacy costs in the North America manufacturing footprint and had to wind those things down, they ended up finding there was a couple of Superfund sites they had to pay for, et cetera, et cetera. So Schwinn ultimately had to declare bankruptcy, and they were already in this umbrella partnership with Giant. And Giant has now become the largest bike manufacturing company in the world. Schwinn, by the way, still exists, but they had to rise from the ashes in a very, very different incarnation. So, and of course, antitrust issues, you kind of always have to pay attention to those, but make sure not to cross the line between co-opetition and price fixing in a market. All right, so putting it in practice. Examples, probably the oldest example. This is Bill back in before his Melinda days, and I was in the same state. Intel and Windows, Intel and Microsoft created the Wintel Alliance, right? Intel worked on hardware, Microsoft created the software. They coexisted, they co-specified the Intel Inside model along with the Windows XP 95, et cetera, et cetera. This is vertical co-opetition, right? Partnering between indirect competitors, and the demand for Intel chips automatically increased. The demand for Microsoft software automatically increased. They locked out other players. It was almost the death of Apple. And then, when Microsoft creates more powerful software, it necessitates a hardware upgrade. And so it kind of feeds back and forth. Then you've got a faster chip you could do more with, and the software gets tapped out, and you've got to come up with the next gen version. You've got the seesaw that just keeps on going and rising both types, right? Now the alliance has since fizzled out, right? Of course, but these giants sort of collaborated to create a software and hardware platform that had a bit of a moat to it, and brought their technology to nearly every home in the world. Another great example is Merck and Pfizer. This is an alliance that's been in place in the pharmaceutical world since 2014. So jointly developing a technology that is an antibody that came from Merck as a potential treatment for multiple types of cancers. So Pfizer has the know-how and the validation to get speed to market and get through clinical testing that Merck doesn't have the heft as a smaller regional player. And so they got together and they decided that the efficacy and the therapeutic efficiency from this could be augmented when combined with various technologies that Pfizer had in their pocket. It actually raised the performance level of the end unit, and it brought it to market probably 3 or 4 years faster than otherwise, and therefore really saved lives and brought cancer treatment to patients as soon as possible. By the same way, leveraging that Pfizer heft in kind of getting things through clinical trials and getting it to market very quickly. Can anyone name this virus? This is SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID. And so it's a little bit more contemporary of an example. Pfizer and BioNTech, right? Combining forces for a lot of the world to create what has ended up being one of the most effective vaccines. But do you think it started, with SARS-CoV-2 being found? No. This is a relationship that was in place in 2018. They were jointly agreeing to do work on mRNA-based vaccines in influenza world, in the flu world. And so this was something that already had a great deal of steam underneath it when SARS-CoV-2 emerged from wherever it emerged from. And they sort of raised their hand and said, we're ready to jump in and address this. So BioNTech's platform in mRNA and Pfizer's capability in testing and clinicals and getting things to market really helped at the end of the day of the world. By the way, this is not, of course, the vaccine that everybody's reading right now, what's going on in China. I've got 40 team members in Guangzhou, Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Shenzhen right now that are on lockdown and haven't left their homes in 21 days. And they're being told they can't come out until May 9th, potentially. It's because, well, in particular in Hong Kong, right? It's interesting when you look at the dynamic. When China takes over Hong Kong, there's this massive distrust, right? Because they sort of just took over this organization. Then you've got the same government that just kind of took your civil liberties away, telling you to take the vaccine. And therefore, about half of Hong Kong's 50+ population are unvaccinated. No trust there. And depending on, whoever feels about what, science works, right? So at the end of the day, when you're unvaccinated, you're at more risk. And so right now, the death rates are the highest in Hong Kong. It's the single largest epicenter in the world. Shanghai, a different story. They're doing all the forced testing and the forced shutdowns. And I can tell you, manufacturers are feeling it. Everybody else is feeling it. But BioNTech was not able to work with Pfizer and not allowed access to the China market with their joint vaccine. Instead, BioNTech worked with a China firm to create an alternate mRNA vaccine. It's been shown to be about 60% less effective. So that's exactly why we're seeing still this long tail active within the China market, because it's a less effective vaccine and there's less penetration on that front. At the end of the day, bringing together competing firms in a complementary way across multinational geographies has repeatedly been proven in many sectors, including pharmaceutical, to be an effective way to move more quickly to market. Some of the most basic, when you think about competition, think about Burger King and McDonald's. But this is an interesting thing. This happened in 2019. This happened where McDonald's and Burger King partnered on a day without Whopper. Now, automatically, that seems like kind of a one-sided proposition, right? The day without Whopper, for this campaign, Burger King stopped selling their top-selling product. And the Whopper, in order to sort of redirect sales and increase sales to McDonald's for a day. Now, why would somebody do that? Well, when you peel it back, this was to help McDonald's with their annual fundraising campaign of donating $2 for every burger sold to children with cancer, and for every Big Mac that was sold. And so, the payback here for Burger King is they did this, by the way, at across a number of stores just in Argentina. So it wasn't worldwide. It was in a very small geography, but they gained global PR, and it was a huge payback that they couldn't have bought that amount of public positive perception for what they did. And it was priceless and memorable, while they only had to do this at a very relatively low cost by doing this in a couple of restaurants in Argentina. And so there's a different way to kind of look at, they didn't subvert themselves. They actually ended up winning on this front. McDonald's at the same time achieved their goal, right? So a nice example of competition. Automotive world, boy, it abounds. But a lot of times these are relationships of convenience. These are one of those things where they never last. They're going to be a momentary win. So Ford's done this with a lot of different folks in a lot of different areas. But this is an example of how to enter a new market where it may not be possible or feasible economically to do so, or from a time standpoint for one to do by their own. In this case, Ford wanted to enter the hybrid truck and SUV category. And, so who's the hybrid leader in the world? By far and away, Toyota with the Prius platform. They had more know-how in hybrid technology than Ford could ever hope to at the time of this relationship. They brought them together in 2011. And so Toyota brings their hybrid know-how on powertrain. Ford brought the #1 selling pickup truck platform in the entire world, and it's remained to this day to be that, right? So it gives an outlet for economic return based on the core competency of Toyota in hybrid platforms, and economic benefit to Ford to being able to leverage that and avoid CAFE fines that were starting to really ramp up right at that time for these big footprint truck platforms. The seeds were laid for this by the 08-09 recession, but people kept buying trucks. But also the power transition to IQ Toyota, right? The direct line descendant, again, a third generation descendant. And they had a lot of problems because of there was a Lexus airbag issue. It created $4.4 billion in legal judgments against the organization that they had to counter. So, both these firms were hurt, and they sort of said, maybe there's a way for us to work together to attack the, use your strength and my strength to tackle this market. So it was a relationship of convenience, but founded in pain. Just as as a quick note, this broke up 18 months later. Everybody returned to flourishing profitability, and the relationship, blew apart just as soon as the first lines were launched, and then began the seeds of the EV platforms that Toyota has now brought to market, and that Ford continues to play catch up on. Another couple of examples for the automotive sector. Many brands that have multi-brands under house. The Volkswagen Group, gosh, how many different marks do they own? But co-warehousing and load consolidation for parts shipment, standardization of components. When you get into an Infiniti and you get the Nissan part number on the windshield wiper, or whatever be the case. That sort of thing. Shared R&D costs. There's lots of this stuff that's leveraged within the multinationals like VW, like General Motors, and such. So it's an intra-company co-opetition model. What do these cars have in common? Now, you may not recognize the platforms. These are European vehicles, but these are city cars. And the city car platforms are from 3 different OEMs: Toyota, Peugeot, and Citroën. So they got together and they basically commonized these platforms to save R&D costs, to drive supply chain savings. The components that are in common across these 3 vehicles are north of 75%. So in essence, you've got this, Apple with a different face to it. And certain people have different brand associations, or there may be different market penetration scenarios in different geographies, but they take cost out of the back end and out of the supply chain in order to actually let them hit the price point that's needed for these rather economical city car sectors. And then across Europe, Citroën is going to have Citroën and Peugeot are going to have a great penetration in the geography of France. Toyota is going to have a different penetration in other geographies, but it gives them savings on that front, which they couldn't get to that price point or that cost point, any one of them independently. Other examples include the joint development that Toyota and BMW did on the Z4 platform and Super platform. It's a BMW engine, the BMW platform. Toyota gets the offtake. They actually just moved everything back a little bit, but it's co-produced, and they took a ton of cost out, and they got to market in probably 24 months faster than any of them would have been able to do independently. 2 more examples from the automotive sector. Again, it abounds, but they always break down. There's a lot of hoopers in the sector. Covisint was developed as a B2B exchange in the automotive sector with multiple decades of like, it's been in place since the year 2000, largely in response to the dot-com boom. But as a purchasing platform and as a way to manage tier suppliers, it continues to thrive for this day. And the founders, GM and Honda, have joined that as well. GM and Honda have been in joint development on battery technology since 2018. In 2020, they expanded that to develop the Honda Prologue, and they started to collaborate as well on hydrogen platforms. So on a lot of this new technology development, this cooperative model shows up in the automotive sector in a huge way, often then spurring a node at which those cooperating partners go off in their own direction, because they've got either their own opinion, or they've got their own core competency to leverage, or they want to make sure they don't stay too close too long, because they've got their own networks to optimize. They're working now on Acura's first EV SUV. That's going to launch. This year, they committed to work together with GM Cruise, right? So they've got the bones, they've got the drivetrain, but they don't have the autonomy. So GM came into the platform and was able to get offtake for their hydrogen platforms and for their EV platforms in exchange for access to the GM Cruise autonomy. So it sort of grows, and this gives another 13 million vehicles across which those platforms can go, which is 13 million vehicles per year. It's a big bolt-on to that joint effort. So, each of these sort of examples in the automotive sector, some old, some new, they all got very, very different chapters, refers to how this joint development and co-opetition as a strategy can be influenced by external forces, but also used in trust-based relationships to forward the aims of an organization. Another example in the chemical sector, Microban 24. So for those who haven't seen this cleaning technology, and I'm staring at a sign right here that says, please wipe down the keyboard and mouse before and after each use. The world for the last 2 years has been cleaning the hell out of everything. And in fact, to the degree that it's breaking down substrates. When you disinfect things that much, and you put that much chemical on surfaces, it breaks things down. A good friend of mine sits on the board of a dental co-op that runs a lot of the Henry Schein Group in North America. And he came to me over lunch one day and said, no, we're getting so many complaints. Everybody's vinyl chairs are breaking down because after every patient, they're disinfecting, right? And it's drying out the material, it's discoloring the material, it's staining people's clothes. They've got to replace these things. They're not cheap. Those dental chairs are like automized and roboticized. It's like, riding at the amusement park. What do? Well, Microban 24 is a technology, as I said, kind of 6 years through method development and certification by the EPA. It's the only technology in the world that if you clean a surface, it will, for up to 24 hours, and even after 96 touches, remain bacteria-free. If you clean a surface once a day in a dental office, and you don't have to disinfect you don't have to clean the keyboard and the mouse, right, after every use. It's clean once a day, and it's good to go. So that's revolutionary. But what's interesting about this model is that, as I told you, I'm an asset-light organization. This is a Procter & Gamble product. Procter & Gamble puts north of $70 million into promotion in North America behind this product. It's almost going to be in 2 years to the level of our revenues that they invest in advertising alone. So that's an interesting one. I need a strong channel to market, somebody who's going to invest and build a brand, who's going to create top-of-mind brand awareness. And that's going to create a halo for all the other brand partnerships I've got all around the world. So that's what we get out of it. What they get out of it is they create a $200 million category, and they pay us only for our royalty on brand and for the key technology that makes that film former work and deliver 24-hour performance. Now, a little backstory here is what P&G also gets is they get to disrupt the aerosol market. The US is the only market in which an aerosol form, the one that you see on the far right-hand side, exists. Nowhere else in the world does that exist. It's all flaresols or trigger sprays that are used for home surface care. But the aerosol category has been owned by Lysol for a long time. And Walmart, major retailers, have had zero support in terms of end cap coverage or shelf space sharing because Lysol had a monopoly on the space. So they came to P&G and said, we need somebody else in the hygiene category to shake up this aerosol space. For 30 years, P&G, Reckitt, everybody's been chasing this residual technology. Well, Microban went and found a very, very interesting and unique film forming polymer that with some minor modifications that we were able to actually file for IP against, made by another company who was so small, family owned, would never qualify as a P&G supplier. We were able to take that technology, get the formulation to work, develop a method with the EPA, get it approved, and then go to the P&G and say, we've solved this 30-year problem. How can you apply it? At the same time, Walmart's creating coal. And just at that time, Nelson Peltz took on the board. He was shaking things up at P&G. They needed innovation. They needed new markets. They said, we need to launch a hygiene brand. Why not co-opt this Microban brand people know and trust and make it our hygiene brand? So those things all came together, right? So it's a beautiful example of multi-stage co-opetition, horizontal and vertical, where everybody wins something. This family-owned company that we now have exclusive offtake rights to these polymer sets on a global basis for the next 100 years, has grown by 500% in the last 2 years. Our organization has doubled revenue and tripled EBITDA in 2 years. P&G has shaken up the Lysol category and has a chance to take this franchise all around the world. We're now going to be launching in summer Microban treated Oral-B toothbrush. We're going to be launching in the future years Tide with Microban, Febreze with Microban, lots of other categories to abound. This will be a hygienic brand across multiple things. Gillette razors treated with Microban technology. So sort of, there's great benefits to come with a very thoughtful approach to co-opetition. I'll share with you selfishly a commercial in case you haven't seen it here. This is the most recent Microban 24 commercial.
Did you know that you have used to get that to you?
We're very proud of not only being a great organization of technologists, an ESOP that helps to create, retirement wealth that people that would normally be microbiologists on a benchtop would never get access to, but now also to be a verb. Don't just clean it, microban it. So get your bottles. It's good stuff. The healthcare sector is not immune to competition. It's just a little more difficult given a lot of the regulatory nature and highly competitive nature of that market, right? So there's something called the Innovation Learning Network. That's been in place in 2005, so it's been in place for 17 years. The aim is to sort of share the joy and the pain of innovations in the healthcare sector. Now, I've never worked directly in the healthcare sector, but by the way, there is a formulation that we launched in partnership with PDI to the healthcare market, using the same core technologies, Microban 24 and an ethyl alcohol formulation, which also provides 24-hour bacteria reduction even after 48 touches. And there's been 6 clinical studies done at the Medical University of South Carolina, Duke University, NYU, a number of different places. They've all been authored and sent out. What they find is that when you use Sandy 24 in a ward in conjunction with other good cleaning practices, there's a substantial reduction in hospital-acquired infection and the associated deaths, which there's over 1 million a year due to cross-contamination and some of the superbugs. And so we're working really, really hard in the healthcare sector. And it's so unique and so difficult, even with such a breakthrough technology, to get that specified into the group purchasing networks that oversee 80% of the purchases in North America healthcare. Not to mention to work through country by country by country, all the purchasing networks in Europe and Asia, et cetera. So even if you've got massive benefits that are going to save lives, it's hard to crack into. It's really hard to innovate in the healthcare space. And so this ILN network was aiming to try and help that. They did a lot of work around co-creation and sharing on platforms, on teaching innovation to organizations that otherwise wouldn't have that as their core competency. Maybe they're great sellers, but they're not great inventors. Maybe one's a great inventor and they need to channel the market, creating that input output. And of course, cultivating trust across the member companies. They introduced design thinking to organizations, and they actually formed a coalition, and they call it wearecatalyst.org. If you're interested in visiting the site, it's really amazing some of the things that they've done within that network. So they actually did sponsor dinner with strangers across their sponsor groups. It's now become one of the most well-attended events on the ILN network, to do a lot like what you're doing here today. There's a certain magic that comes with colliding the human being, right? And creating the interactions and creating the learnings, and creating those different viewpoints, those different street corners that I talked about earlier. So they actually have specific formal individuals in their network that are called network weavers. They're full-time ombudsmen. Their aim is to connect. And so they're obviously very ebullient and outgoing personnel, and they get to know everybody in the network and they create connections. Oh, did you know so-and-so is working on this and that and the other thing? And they drive those connections. That's also another really, really great practice in co-opetition, is having a third party independent oversight, sort of, as Eric Schmidt used to call himself at Google, he was not really the CEO, he was just the adult in the room. But have that third party objective adult in the room that doesn't have a stake in any of the particular participants, but only wants to make sure that the thing flows and works and can define the boundaries of the sandbox and make sure everybody plays nice. Another really great practice that came out of ILN. There's some published case studies on it, but I would hold this up as a much more difficult industry landscape in which co-opetition is working and thriving, and that you could use as a basis for learning on the potential application in the education space. Other examples, right? So airlines, we talked about Delta and America. We talked also about the Star Alliance. Right? So these are competing firms that develop a network starting in 1997. Now covers 26 different international airlines, a lot of regional players basically banding together to have international reach, right? And so that saves on logistics, that gives them access to customers that they otherwise would not get access to. It saves on marketing costs, it saves on ticketing costs. There's a reason that it's thrived for almost 30 years. The Alliance for Main Street Fairness. Has anyone heard about that coalition? That's a lot of big firms that you know in terms of big box retailers. Home Depot, Best Buy, Target, Walmart, Sears, whatever's left of them, and combining against Amazon and creating sort of fair retail practice. And from that came Walmart.com, amongst other things, but also a lot of the initiatives with regards to pickup and delivery that everybody had a chance to use during the pandemic. Apple hired in mobile phone chips, right? Apple hired Samsung to produce a chip for the iPhone 7. This kind of came out of that Wintel alliance. They had no access to those things. They had to go out and find another chip partner and build their platforms upon. They ended up partnering with Intel, and they got access to Intel chips for many years on their computer platforms. They learned enough through that alliance to then launch the M1 chip and sort of leave Intel behind. So in the chip space and the electronic space, it's heavily active, but again, it's oftentimes used as an opportunity to forward one's own aims while building on the competencies of someone else. And they, at the same time, reduced dependency on one supplier and laid the groundwork for making their own chips. Social media sites. I've got my own take on social media. I won't share that with you here, but when you think about Tinder, they're using Facebook or Twitter credentialing, right? So you get into there, oh gosh, I've got 6,000 passwords. I don't remember how to log into Tinder. Conveniently, it says sign into Facebook, and you just hit the button, and next thing you know, you're signed in. But then Facebook gets that information, and again, your whole world's exposed. But that's just another very interesting thing where the convenience of the login process is co-opted for the benefit of Facebook or Twitter having more access to where you are and what you're doing and who you're talking to. And that's why when you do that one search on Amazon for cherry pie tin, and then you go to your Facebook feed and they're going to try and sell you one, you're like, how does that happen? That's how. We talked about Amazon Marketplace. We talked about a lot of things in the automotive sector. Daimler, BMW are relying on mobility. They're Mercedes and BMW cooperating on something. Heck yeah, right? Against some of those big other multinationals. That's what they need to do to compete in the world market space. Gaming. So there's been a ton of co-opetition in the gaming space, and a lot of winners and a lot of losers as well, right? So, but Sony collaborated to distribute PlayStation content on, if you've got a new Samsung smart TV at any point in time in the last 5 years, that's automatically tucked into the menu. You've actually got to do a forced delete to get that feed out of there. Sports, it's not all win or lose, right? I mean, ultimately, at the end, there is a finish line. But in cycling, anybody who loves to watch the Tour de France, the strength and the power of that peloton chasing down the guys that are on the breakaway, unbelievable. That's co-opetition at its finest, right? Distance running and NASCAR racing, drafting, absolutely, right? You don't necessarily get to pick who you're cooperating with there. It's the guy that's next to you that's side drafting, or in front of you who's a great puller, or you're a great pusher, and you're not going to win, but you get to choose who you're going to push across that finish line. There's intricate game theory involved in co-opetition, and you need to be mindful of that as well, and have an end game in mind. In the animal kingdom, it's omnipresent. You think about bees, ants, schools of fish, and all the things. You can watch lots and lots of great David Attenborough content to see how competition and co-opetition are hard at play in the world of life and death in the animal kingdom. Finance. So blockchain technologies are supposed to be like the next generation independent platform, a very new approach to allow us to achieve sort of large scale and systematic cooperation with an entirely distributed network. Don't know how this is going to shake out, but it is a potential cooperative platform for the finance network. And being in Charlotte, I read a lot about how Bank of America and Wells Fargo are considering utilizing blockchain technologies for their benefit of reach and access, whilst maintaining their strength and core in sort of the network-based and the outlet-based banking system. Honeywell, 3M, they got together early in the pandemic to cooperate on PPE, mask innovations and distribution on that front. Ventilators and other things. There's actually been a joint business venture that came out of that. So they kind of got together on a relationship of convenience. Let's do something good for the world. And they've turned that into a profit-making venture, as you might imagine, that's what really drives their game clock. So how does that apply in the education sector? So we're going to look at a couple of examples here, and I've tried to select some examples that are outside the US so that maybe we can just sort of look at those things over there and then have an opportunity to see kind of what elements may work in the US or in Minnesota. Of course, in the educational sector, and the primary mode of engagement is it continues to be a highly competitive pursuit of top candidates, and who lands the candidates gets the funding and all that sort of thing, right? There's a lot of interesting little sub-collaborative relationships that exist. Joint MBA JD programs, for example, Northwestern Georgetown, there's many others, but those are great examples where you're able to complement a core or a university that puts together a 6-year medical degree program. You're automatically locking in that student for not only undergrad, but their post MCAT work, and locking in therefore a revenue stream for a period of time in a very unique way. International market development, there's a ton of work going on jointly. I know from Kellogg's standpoint, I hear about all they're doing in international joint development in the Mideast and other, but creating educational reach on a global basis for a smaller network of what they've got, and joint online marketing and library access across the network, even though they're still competing for those highest of caliber MBA students. There's specific geographical networks, and the two examples I want to cover today are the sixth form colleges in the UK and the Consortium of Community Universities in South Brazil. I think both of these are good bases for what you'll work on in your workshops and to showcase how a co-opetition mindset can work in the educational sector, because both of these have been in place for quite a long period of time. And so they have staying power, and they've learned a lot, and they've been guinea pigs. And hopefully this gives you some food for thought and some seeds in terms of how you might use the viewpoint of co-opetition to better your collective aims. So the sixth form colleges in the UK are, it's very different than sort of the No Child Left Behind and so the programs, the little bit free form programs we've got in the United States. In the UK, you sort of test in early on, and you're on a science track, or you're on a humanities track, or you're on a trades track very early on. You're gated into different areas. The sixth form colleges it's a network of 11 colleges across the UK that prepare the 16 to 18-year-old age group for A-level university exams. So these are folks that are the highest performing student segment. These schools are part of a network, part of this coalition, but they compete intensively for that student enrollment. And of course, that drives funding, and that drives their ability to staff and do new programs, et cetera. They're all located in the south of England. There's a different network of sixth form colleges in the Midlands and in the north, but specifically this case it applies to those 11 that are just in the south of the UK. So their aims were collaborating for quality assurance and making sure that there was a consistency across that network, right? And preventing leakage out of the south into the Midlands or into the north or into Ireland, as an example, to help manage their staff networks and improve recruitment. as well as retention, because when you're in a network and you've got somebody with a specialization and maybe they don't get the funding for that or they don't have the program for that, they can move somewhere else in that coalition versus being lost outside of the network. Sharing good practices, jointly promoting the consortium, sort of gaining the heft, right? Swinging above their weight class as a whole and waving the flag for the South. Joint procurement, we talked about, that's kind of the easiest collaborative venue to think about benefit. Joint purchasing, service providers, goods and the like. Scaled and local training opportunities. So that's also joint purchasing power, but when they have a chance to do an event, it's not an event at a school, it's an event across a network of 11. And so you can do it with scale, and you can do it at a lower cost when you do it jointly from a training standpoint than otherwise. And it gives them basically a built-in lobby to influence the national discussion on educational developments and direction. The exam board negotiations and the lobbying that takes place there, the access to local politicians that help to drive selective funding, and the agencies that kind of run the educational network there. So, so that's one. The key learnings across this network, and they've been in place for 15 years, are that they do employ a third-party coordinator who is a full-time asset for that group, who are not located in any particular geography to have any sort of bias, but indeed has zero association with any participant within the network, and basically is the key broker, that network connector, that ombudsman, the adult in the room who can calm the seas. The benefits that they've received and learned about over the 15-year period, at which point the reference case is here. And if anybody wants to read it, I'll gladly share the deck. You could look up the study that was done in 14. So they've continued to be in place for another 8 years since. They had really good information flow. And so any of the myopia that might have come from maybe one of those colleges that maybe is located in a particular area and had certain strengths, maybe in they're coastal in Plymouth, and they've got a lot more strength in maybe oceanography preparation or something sea-based versus somebody who's further inland. A lot of dropping of those walls and collaborative sharing on information flow that had historically developed within each college, and sort of like sharing those strengths, sharing those core strengths. Leverage with supplier of hard goods, you automatically gain 11x the purchasing power and services, huge benefits. And they established a buying coalition. Third-party coordinator runs the buying coalition. It's a registered group purchasing organization, and it gives a great benefit to the group as a whole. And that frees up capital, right? That can be invested in meaningful ways elsewhere, in salaries, in retention, in preparation, in further education, to help the network go farther and be more competitive against the rest of the UK networks. Shared professional development, both in education and in retention across the network, so you don't have leakage of great people out of the network. And it sort of enhanced curriculum development, where you can pull together across maybe 4 of those 11 and do a joint program proposal to establish a new track where any one of those 11 could not get that sponsorship from the exam board to have that new track be allowed. Joint quality assurance, we talked about that being a huge benefit, but there's a lot of auditing that takes place, right? And so in audit prep, there's a lot of third parties services that they found were profit centers, and going from one to one to one to one to the next. Now they do that within house, and they run that audit prep from within. Again, that third party coordinator runs that audit prep across all 11, and there's a huge cost savings for that as well, and much higher compliance achieved over the course of that 15-year period. Higher enrollment. So when you've got this network that's humming as a whole, it becomes a more inviting lily pad for that prospective student versus considering a disjointed Midlands or North group. And for those that are even within the South that are not part of the network, they've also had better gravitas in drawing the students. And then for subjects that had limited take-up, they've actually gained the ability to have, sort of the right quorum in those courses by being able to set up a busing network to get students to and from, so they can participate in a course that might not be offered at their primary location, but they go to a secondary location and gain access to that. And that gives then the fund sharing that goes with that as well, and full enrollment in those courses versus probably facing some judgments and maybe termination. So that is the one from the UK. In Brazil, there's a very interesting community university partnership in, again, I don't know why everything's in the south, but it's the south of Brazil. Are we in the south of Minnesota? Maybe that's beneficial. So it's 15 universities, 40 campuses, 208,000 students. So 60% of the total enrollment in southern Brazil higher education. So there's a critical mass here. And again, their aims were, they started with the simplest, right? How can we share administrative burden, take cost out of procurement of services and goods, and start from that standpoint. But also then all the knowledge sharing and the capabilities and the asset sharing within the network versus non-network participants, sort of gaining scale on those things. A joint stronger voice with the government. There's far more governmental oversight, I admit, I think, than in these geographies than potentially here, but I don't know. Maybe that's a gold mine waiting to be tapped. And stronger joint negotiating power, because of course that's unionized environments. So they've got more leverage and more power against the worker unions. And again, they're able to develop new tracks jointly that otherwise any individual network participant would not have success in gaining the funding and the ability to go into that new space. This construction has been in place for over 2 decades. So in essence, it's like start the collaboration on something that everybody must do and see what benefits can come from the agglomeration of that as a unit power and the savings that can come from that, and then figure out a way to do those things better and cheaper. And then as a unit, swinging above your weight class and figuring out other areas that the network can advantage itself. Benefits that they have achieved over a 20+ year period. They reduced total administrative and procurement costs, and this was double-digit reductions because they basically took all the tack time out of each of those individual units and were able to go to a common board that managed that across the entire network. They have seen an improvement in standardized test results. And it's because they've spent a lot less time on administration and audit prep and all those things, and more time on creating great student environments and great student outcomes, and have expanded their program offerings so they continue to draw more students. And that's sort of a nice flywheel that creates a great outcome as well. They've decreased the threat of the new private higher education institutions. I can tell you in the Charlotte area, Charlotte Mecklenburg schools just this week fired the head of CMS. It's the fourth guy in 7 years that has been fired. CMS is run like a county, not like a school district. So when we were moving there, we specifically chose to go to Iredell County and get out of that, that big thing. CMS is getting killed by charter schools. And so this type of collaboration and consortium has helped this Brazil network compete well against creating a space that would be favorable for those kinds of startups. And of course, they're not a profit-making center, so they're always in a great position to renegotiate the percentage or the rates on their federal debts. So at the end, and you will get this as a handout, I believe, in your breakouts, but this is a framework that I think you might want to consider in your breakout sessions from a competitive, complementor standpoint, customer and supplier standpoint. Think about your organization, your university, your program as a whole. Questions to think about before you dive in to your workshops. Can you get there alone? And if so, that's not something to consider putting on the table, because you're going to compromise something that otherwise you can go and do yourself. So just look at where the weaknesses are, right? Is it real? Is it worth it? Can we win? Right? Everybody's got that sort of business filter, but put it through a simple filter. The things that you can go do on your own, don't put those on the table. What's the purpose? Define a scope, define very strictly the boundaries. And again, this is where that third party can play a very important role. And I think where a lot of the case studies have shown, that's a really important consideration. What are the no-no areas, right? So half of the good elements of strategy are choosing what we're going to do, and half is choosing what we won't do. And that's super important on a collaborative network and making sure you don't get scope creep. Kind of what's in play, what's out of play. And that's really, no matter how warm your relationship is, there's got to be some hard borders as to what you're going to work on and what's not. And of course, you have to make sure that anyone who participates intimately in the network understands where those borders are, so you don't get leakage. What are the limits? You have to communicate that through, what's on a need to know basis. What can you share? What can't you share? And anyone who actively participates in that network has to understand exactly where those borders lie. In my business, for example, our partners don't even know the registered CAS number for our active technology, because as soon as they've got that, they're just going to do a search and go find a commodity supplier that might have that same active. Excuse me. So you have to really understand the limits of sharing and institutionalize that within the network. And then look continuously on what you do to protect the coalition and make sure you protect your entity within the coalition, to make sure that scope drift doesn't take over time and go into a space that you had originally defined as being off limits. 4 key principles really remain true and have to remain true within a cooperative network to avoid entropy. It is the interdependence of the organizations within that have to remain the source of value. As soon as that's untrue, break it off. The location and the timing of value, the coordination of that, have to be avoiding cannibalization of existing activities by the parties involved. The benefits to each party have to be clearly defined, even the sharing of that value creation as well, so that it is a positive sum game. And of course, this drives trust. And what oftentimes is the function that does that the most in collaborative networks, and in particular, what the 2 case studies show in the educational industry, is that there is a third party, independent adult in the room that continues to drive the borders and drive the network benefits. The framework to the right, I just included this as a visual reference. This is actually one that was used by the UK Premier League football group, which is, gosh, with the amount of money they spend, one of the most highly competitive sporting groups in the entire world. But they had cooperation amongst competitors to enhance applied sport research to the feeder tiers that come into their club teams, to make sure that jointly they were fostering amongst all the halo groups that fed into the Premier League for recruitment in each of these different geographies. They were making that network collaborative and making sure that the best could rise to the top. And then, of course, at that point, they're just competing on location, how they can win, teammates, and of course, cash as to who's going to draw from that. But they make the feeder nest work as best as it can within this. And again, it's a third-party coordinated network. I think it's a Swiss guy that runs that seat right now. Swiss independence continues to rule. Start with the end in mind. Start with your needs and desires, and be careful what you put on the table, because if you can go alone, don't put that on the table. What do you want to achieve? Share that. Find out as much as you can about the potential partner and their needs, and where there's shared aims and where there's competing aims. Has that other organization been in a partnership before? What are the key learnings? Right? Don't treat it as a guinea pig exercise. No need to recreate pain. And then, what can you offer to be appealing? And if your network needs serious help from an older brother, really consider that third party influence to make sure that, if you're dealing with senior, junior partners, that there's gating and appropriate sharing taking place. Key takeaways, right? Have a cooperative attitude. So culture and context matters. We've got this massive set of programming that has driven us to think that it's a zero-sum world. Not necessarily, as I hope you've seen today. But be selective, because I don't think that applies here. But in the business world, if you should ever join, I'll tell you what, you got to be really careful who you choose to partner with, because it may be somebody who is really aiming to do it to subvert you. Treat your partners like your customers, because you can go further together and get creative and be prepared to think and work differently, get those street corner views, be transparent within the boundaries, because trust is a two-way street. Share that smile, right? And make a win-win. And per the visual example here, though, whilst you're there, eat as much hay as you can. So it's been a pleasure talking to you today. I really want to thank Jason Bruins, Molly Angberson, Rob Sleazer, and for you for braving the weather, coming to participate. Hope you have an excellent day on campus, excellent breakout workshops. Glad to take any questions. And sorry for my stay over. That's all I've got.
Any questions? Want to put them on?
Yeah.